We have always heard from our parents and teachers that reading makes you smarter. It builds empathy, sharpens your focus, expands your vocabulary, and can even strengthen your memory. Successful people talk about how important reading is all the time. But does reading books, articles, and stories actually affect our brain? Humans evolved language, but reading is a remarkably recent invention. So, how did something that humans invented only a few thousand years ago become something our brains are so good at? Writing and reading were invented only about 6,000 years ago, which isn't nearly enough time for our brains to evolve specifically for reading. Instead, reading uses and combines neural systems that originally evolved for other things, including vision, language, and recognizing objects. Today, we are surrounded by more written information than any previous generation in human history. Between social media, subreddits, articles, messages, and books, we can consume an enormous amount of text every day. So, if we are reading more than any generation in human history, why aren't we all geniuses? Because reading isn't the same thing as thinking. You can read thousands of words every day and still remember almost none of them. When you scroll through short posts, headlines, fragmented pieces of information, you often aren't trying to understand an entire argument. You are looking for the next interesting thing. And this isn't necessarily because your brain is broken. Your brain is adapting to what you are asking it to do. If you constantly switch between short pieces of information, you become practiced at quickly finding the important parts and moving on. But deep reading asks for something completely different. When you sit down with a difficult book and stay with it for an hour, you have to remember what you read earlier, understand unfamiliar ideas, connect different parts of an argument, and sometimes stop and think about what the author actually means. Reading doesn't magically increase your intelligence, but it gives your brain an opportunity to practice some of the things we associate with intelligent thinking. And this is where reading becomes much more interesting because reading isn't just about information, reading lets you enter someone else's mind. You can be sitting in your room in 2026 and read the thoughts of someone who was born 500 years ago in a completely different country under completely different circumstances. You can see the world through their assumptions, their fears, their beliefs, and their experiences. Think about how strange that actually is. In a world where we are trapped inside one body and one lifetime, reading is one of the closest things we have to time travel. You can spend a few hours with someone who died centuries ago. When Marcus Aurelius wrote his private thoughts, or when Dostoevsky wrote about suffering, they weren't writing for an algorithm to recommend their work to people thousands of kilometers away. Yet, centuries later, you can still sit down and have a silent conversation with them. You can disagree with them, you can question them, you can realize that someone who lived hundreds of years ago understood something about human nature that you had never considered. And that's where reading can do something that simply collecting information cannot. It can give you perspective. But there's an important problem. If reading automatically made people smarter, then the person who reads the most would always be the smartest person in the room, and that's obviously not true. You could read 100 books without questioning a single thing you read. You could memorize thousands of facts and still be terrible at reasoning. You could read only things you already agree with and spend your entire life becoming better at proving yourself right. So maybe the value of reading isn't in how many books you finish, maybe it's in what happens after you close the book. Do you question what you read? Do you connect it to something else? Does it change your opinion? Does it make you notice something you hadn't noticed before? Because intelligence isn't just having more information, it's knowing what to do with that information. And maybe that's why people who read constantly aren't necessarily smarter because they read. They might simply be giving themselves more opportunities to think. So, does reading actually make you smarter? The short answer is it depends on how you read. Reading thousands of words without thinking about them won't magically make you intelligent, but sitting with a difficult idea, following an argument, struggling to understand it, questioning it, and connecting it to everything you already know, that can change the way you think. Reading doesn't make you smarter just because your eyes move across words. It makes you smarter when you let the words change how you think. And maybe that's the real reason we keep coming back to books. Not because they contain some magical ingredient that makes us intelligent, but because every book gives us another mind to borrow for a few hours, another life to experience, another perspective to consider. And in a world where we only get one life of our own, that's a pretty good deal.